Tashidale, and welcome to Tibet Talks. I'm Ashwin Verghese of the International Campaign for Tibet. Our president, Tenzin Gyatso, is still in Dharamsala, India on a work trip, so I will be your host for today's program, and I thank you for joining us. On this episode of Tibet Talks, we have an important anniversary to discuss. But first, this week also marked a different anniversary. The birth anniversary of Gendun Cheki Nyima, the 11th Panchen Lama of Tibetan Buddhism, who turned 34 this past Tuesday, April 25th. Although the Panchen Lama's birthday should have been a festive occasion, in fact, it was a somber one. That's because the Panchen Lama has not been seen in public for nearly 28 years. On May 17, 1995, just 3 days after the Dalai Lama identified the then 6-year-old Gendun Cheki Nyima as the reincarnated Panchen Lama, the Chinese government abducted the child and his parents. No one has heard from any of them ever since. This brazen act of kidnapping and child abuse is an unspeakable international crime. But China's actions were even more nefarious than that. Historically, the Dalai Lama and the Panchen Lama have played a vital role in identifying one another's reincarnations. So after kidnapping Gendun Cheki Nyima, China appointed its own Panchen Lama, who today serves mainly as a mouthpiece for Beijing. If the time comes to identify a successor to the current 14th Dalai Lama, there is little doubt that Beijing will use its own choice for the Panchen Lama to select its own Dalai Lama. We in the international community must not let that happen. Please take a look with me at this short video. As you can see, China's abduction and continued disappearance of the Panchen Lama is part of the anti-religion Chinese Communist Party's long-term plan to interfere in the succession of the Dalai Lama. Thankfully, countries like the United States have already said that His Holiness's succession is a purely religious matter that only Tibetan Buddhists can, and not Chinese communists, will get to decide on. In fact, the U.S.'s Tibetan Policy and Support Act of 2020 makes it clear that if any Chinese official tries to interfere in the succession of the Dalai Lama, they will be sanctioned by the United States government. Passing the TPSA was a major step towards safeguarding the religious freedom of the Tibetan people. But we must continue to call for the Panchen Lama's freedom and safety. Please sign ICT's new petition to House Select Committee on China Chairman Mike Gallagher and Ranking Member Raja Krishnamurti, calling on them to raise the Panchen Lama with Chinese government officials. The link to the petition is www.savetibet.org/Panchen_Lama. Again, that's savetibet.org/PANCHEN_LAMA. Lama. And we will put that link in the comment section of our Facebook Live post. With all that said, as I mentioned at the beginning of the program, there is another important anniversary for us to discuss today on Tibet Talks. In March 2013, Xi Jinping became president of the People's Republic of China. That followed him taking over as General Secretary of the Chinese Communist Party a few months earlier. At the time, there was optimism that Xi's status as a perceived moderate, as well as his personal family connections to the Dalai Lama, would lead to an improvement of conditions in Tibet, a country that China has now brutally occupied for over 60 years. However, a decade into Xi's leadership, the opposite has come true. Tibet has only gotten worse, and Xi has become the most powerful Chinese leader since Chairman Mao Zedong. Last month, Xi was appointed to an unprecedented third term by China's rubber stamp legislature. With Xi firmly entrenched, it's important to look back on what his 10 years in power have done to Tibet, and to look ahead to what the future holds. To do that, we have a guest who is a first-rate researcher on Tibet. In fact, he is ICT's research analyst, and I am proud to introduce him to you now. Please join me in welcoming my ICT colleague, Tenzin Norgay. Norgay-la, Tashidale.
Tashidale.
Thanks for coming back to the program, Norgay. It's good to have you on Tibet Talks once again. As I mentioned, to mark Xi's decade in power, you have written a new report for ICT called 10 Years of Xi Jinping, Sinification and Securitization of Tibetans for the Chinese Nation State. That report will be published by ICT soon, and today we're going to have a conversation about your findings. But first, one note for our audience. If you're watching this live and you'd like to ask a question for Tenzin Norgay, please post your question in the comment section of our Facebook Live post, or email your question to comments@savetibet.org, and we'll do our best to respond to your questions before the end of today's show. With that, let's get into the discussion. Norgay-la, as I mentioned, you are ICT's research analyst, and you've written a new, soon-to-be-published report about Xi Jinping's 10 years in power and what they mean for Tibet. But to begin with, let's talk a little bit about Xi himself. Who is Xi Jinping? Where did he come from? And how did he rise the ranks of power?
Thank you, Ashwin. So, as a researcher, I find Xi Jinping's life very fascinating, and as you mentioned during the introduction, he is now the most powerful Chinese leader after Mao Zedong to rule the whole of China. Let me step back and begin the conditions under which he grew up, and when he was born, and what was the state of affairs in China when he was born, going back to the history. So Xi Jinping was born in 1953. That's he is a leader, the current Chinese leader, who was born after the establishment of the People's Republic of China in 1949. And he was born in Beijing, although his ancestral place would be in Fubing in Shanxi province. And Xi Jinping's father, Xi Chongxun, was one of the revolutionary leaders of China. Therefore, in terms of the Chinese leaders that are in existence today, Xi Jinping falls into the category of a princeling, whose father was a revolutionary leader and who was powerful in the past. But at that time, we also got to remember that Mao was the paramount leader in China And that also meant, just like any other party leaders, his family, including his father, also had to face a lot of trials and tribulations. And when she was growing up, even his schooling had to be stopped because Mao would launch the Cultural Revolution in 1966, and then also later on, as he was growing up, Mao comes with different ideas, and he, early in his youth, was sent to work in an agricultural commune in the countryside for about 6-7 years. So there are these parts of his life history through which he has gone through a lot of hardships during his early years. But then he, in a way, continued his career. He was very determined, and he went to the top Chinese school to get his bachelor's degree in chemical engineering, and then also get later on also got a doctorate of law from Tsinghua University, which is equivalent, comparable to MIT in the United States. So, the early breakthrough in Xi's career, his rise in the ranks, was he did not have a very easy start in the early in his career, because he applied to become a member of the Communist Party 10 times in 1973, and on his 10th attempt he was given membership. So in 1974, so that began his career, and obviously, as he went along the path, he has taken on different designations along his career as party secretaries or deputy party secretaries or governors of different counties and provinces in the Chinese heartland. So looking through his career, I think 1974 was his launch in the Communist Party's hierarchy, entry, and then of course in 2002 he rose through the ranks and became a member of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of China. And then in 2007 he became one of the Politburo Standing Committee members. So that's a very powerful position. And 2007 onwards, that was his, I would say, his watershed year in terms of his kickstarting his career as the top leader of China. And 2008, he became the vice president. And then, of course, coming to more recent years, in 2012, November, he was made the General Secretary of the Communist Party of China, which is like the top leadership position of the Communist Party of China. And subsequently, as you mentioned in your introduction, he was appointed as the President of the People's Republic of China in March 2013. So, going through his life history, it's a very fascinating life history, and he has, one would assume that, considering his early years, hardships that he and his family members endured, would make him would have a softer heart in that sense, or more kind of liberal-mindedness, because he had to go through a lot of hardships. But then that did not work out as we would assume it to be, because I think essentially what the thoughts and the positions that Xi Jinping has taken has contradicted many of the analysts and researchers' assumptions about where he might go during his leadership.
Yeah, thank you, Norgay. And you're right. That is a interesting and sad detail that someone who endured so much hardship at the hands of the Communist Party when he was young and whose family also endured hardship is now himself responsible for inflicting so much suffering on other people. But an important part of Xi's story is his family's personal connections to Tibet and, in fact, to His Holiness the Dalai Lama himself. Can you please tell us about those connections?
Yeah. So Xi Jinping's family has a lot of connections to Tibetan in many ways. Uh, okay, so to begin with, his father, Shi Tongxun, was had very good relationship with the Tibetan leaders, like uh, political and religious leaders in Tibet. Um, early in the early years in 1954, when His Holiness would go to Beijing for an extended stay there, he would constantly meet with Xi Jinping's father, Xi Tongxun, and he had a great affinity towards Xi Jinping's father. He would, in a way, gift him an Omega watch, which is like a rare commodity, So he would give him a very luxurious watch, and then Xi Tongxun would in effect wear that watch many years, many decades down the line, because as a symbol of friendship. So Xi Tongxun, many of the Tibetan leaders, like the elders, would, from what I know, from what I've heard, is that many have a good view of him because he was a moderate in that sense, who had very moderate views in terms of minority policies, how to deal with the Tibetans and the Uyghurs and other minorities in China. And of course, Xi Jinping is also had opposed it down the line when the Beijing Tiananmen crackdown happened. He was one of those leaders who opposed that crackdown. So, in that sense, he is viewed as someone with a very moderate viewpoint. And if you ask any Tibetans, in terms of their views on Chinese leaders, there would be only two figures. There would be first Hu Yaobang, who is always Tibetans love citing Hu Yaobang's policies, because Hu Yaobang was very liberal, and early in his years in 1980s and during his visits to Tibet, he reversed many of the earlier policies, and he even went to the extent of apologizing to the Tibetans for the misrule. And he also introduced many policies, pulled out many of the Chinese cadres out of Tibet, and all the other remainings would have to learn Tibetans so that they can interact with the Tibetans more amicably. So Hu Yaobang is there right at the top in terms of Tibetans standard
Affinity.
for affinity, a standard for how a ruler should be. And then there's of course also leaders like Xi Tongxun, Xi Jinping's father, who also is often cited by Tibetan elders like someone has very moderate viewpoints and who tries to work things up without using any violence. Basically, let's work it out kind of attitude. So that is his father's legacy. And then of course Xi Jinping is a very devout Buddhist practitioner, and even at the end of her life, when she passed away, and she was buried under full Tibetan Buddhist rites. So I've even heard from very good sources that Xi Jinping's mother, when Xi Jinping came to power, she in a way asked him to bring His Holiness back. So that is at the height of how much of a closeness that is there and how much of the family wanted things to be resolved. But then these are, of course, like from sources, very good sources, but I don't have any video evidence or anything like this to show. So these are very internal matters. Then, of course, Xi's wife is also like a practitioner of Tibetan Buddhism, right? So there is a lot of connections, like in Xi's family and Tibet. So so that's like that's why at the beginning of Xi's rule, because of all these family connections, all these historical relationship building, many of the Tibetans and other observers thought, things might get different, things might change.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point that, given those connections, his mother, his wife, their affinity and love for Tibetan Buddhism and respect for His Holiness, and the Tibetan people's respect for Xi's father relative to other Chinese leaders. What were those expectations when Xi took power 10 years ago? What did Tibetans inside Tibet and outside Tibet and other Tibet observers expect Xi would do relative to Tibet once he took over as China's top leader?
Yeah, so many of the observers didn't have very, very good view or understanding in terms of his political thinking. But then, of course, the best proxy was his father's legacy. So, in that sense, his people were viewing him in the lens of his father's policies, thinking. So the expectation was like that, just like his father, he would also be moderate, and he would be more accommodating in terms of the Tibetans and other minority nationalities in China, in terms of implementing policies. And there was a lot of hope that that the Chinese leadership at the top, led by him, would be more realistic, would be more liberal-minded, and the expectation was like many of the past policy grievances would be addressed. And if we step back 10 years ago and look at all these self-immolations that have taken place inside Tibet, beginning from from 2011 to 2022, there have been about 159 self-immolations in Tibet. And out of all these 159, 84 Tibetan self-immolators self-immolated themselves in 2012. 84 out of 159 is like 53% of all the self-immolators. So 53% of the self-immolators doused themselves and put themselves on fire in 2012. And 2012 is a very important year because that's the year when Xi Jinping came to power as the General Secretary of Communist Party of China. So the message was, in my view, that they were hoping that through their selfless act, it may spark some change, bring about some sense, some good changes with the new leadership. So that was the expectation. But then, of course, things have not turned out as per the expectation, and now we continue to see what's happening inside Tibet.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. Like you said, unfortunately, looking back a decade later, we can see that some of the optimism that people were feeling 10 years ago has not come to fruition. But you kind of touched on this already with the wave of self-immolations in the number of self-immolations in 2012. And it is very interesting to think of that in the framework of those brave Tibetans hoping that this would actually bring about change as Xi took power. But can you elaborate on that a little bit and kind of help us set the stage for what was actually happening in Tibet in 2012 and 2013? You mentioned self-immolations. There were other things going on at the time. What was the situation like there?
So I think there are many events that were unfolding inside Tibet and also internationally before Xi Jinping ascended the top leadership as the General Secretary and the President of the People's Republic of China. We have to step back and look at there was a huge pan-Tibet uprising by the Tibetan people in the spring of 2008. So it was the year when the Tibetan people expressed themselves of their disaffection with the misrule that is being imposed on them. And if we even step back even more years back, we can also look in terms of internationally scenario about that. With the fall of the former Soviet Union and the collapse of communism in Eastern Europe, China was very fearful. In fact, the Communist Party of China was very fearful that they might also meet the same fate as the collapsing of the communists in Eastern Europe and the implosion of the former Soviet Union. So they were taking a lot of measures against meeting a similar fate as So, so these were the inside Tibet scenario and the international scenario under which Xi Jinping rose to power. So, with Xi's arrival on the scene as the top leader, he, in a way, began to implement many of those research findings from party leaders of how to ensure that the CCP remains in power and it does not lose grip on its power and authority. So that's why from day one, it started the roller coaster started in that sense. If we look into the data on the refugees exodus, Tibetan refugees exodus from Tibet. Earlier, before Xi Jinping, before 2008 uprising, every year there was about roughly around 2,500 to 3,000 new arrivals coming from Tibet, fleeing Tibet and settling in the exile community. But then after the 2008 uprising, the Chinese Communist Party started to implement more aggressive policies, and that number started to drop down dramatically. In fact, in 2008, there was roughly about, I think, 500 or 600 refugees from Tibet. I think 700, if I remember correctly. But then it climbed a bit in 2011 to about back to about 750. That was 2011, and then the year Xi Jinping came to power, 2012, that number dropped like 50% to roughly about 350. So, and then over the years since 2012 to now 2022, like last count, it was only 5 Tibetan refugees who managed to make it outside of Tibet. So that's, if you take into comparison between 2011, the year before Xi Jinping came to power, and 2022, the last calendar year, there's like a 99% drop in the arrival of new refugees in Tibet. It is not that things have changed and life is beautiful and everything is harmonious and fine, and that's why people have stopped fleeing Tibet. It is because a lot of policies have been implemented, a lot of measures have been taken, and in terms of border blockage, in terms of surveillance and whatnot. So you can literally feel that the numbers have been now trickling down. It's now about 5, and maybe in this calendar year, probably 5 or 10 may be able to come out, but I don't expect more than that. So that was like what was the scenario inside Tibet and also international scenario under which Xi Jinping came to power and how he started to roll out his policies.
Thank you, Norgay. So let's get a little bit into some of those policies that Xi has implemented during his decade in power. One of the major goals that Xi has pursued in Tibet is Sinification, which can otherwise be known as Sinicization. So can you tell us what is Sinification and what does it mean to, as the report says, Sinify Tibetans in the Chinese nation state?
Yeah, to understand Sinification, I think we have to first step back and also understand one of the central themes of Xi's rule, and that is he would address, reiterate it again and again, this Chinese phrase called 中华民族, which in the English equivalent means like Chinese nation. So, China, the vision for China, there has been like a lot of like political leaders, philosophers, you name it, like before establishment of the People's Republic of China, leaders and thinkers have been thinking about what should be the vision for China. And even after the establishment of PRC in 1949, thinkers and philosophers were still thinking about the vision for China. What should China be? So there have been a lot of exchange of thoughts, debates, of many proposals, but over the years, the hardliners stream of thought has prevailed, in my opinion, and Xi Jinping has, in a way, derived many of his thoughts from many of these hardliners stream of thoughts. He could have gone in many different directions, but then there were options before him, and but he chose to go with the hardliner stream of thought. So, what does this emphasis on 中华民族 mean? We have to look into many of the Xi Jinping speeches, and he talks about China dream, the rejuvenation of China. And he has even gone forward as 2 milestones, goals, like, and the first has already been achieved according to the party. And the second one is now the national rejuvenation of China by the centennial anniversary of the People's Republic of China's establishment, which is 2049. So that is the party's thinking. That is the Xi Jinping's thinking to look to the centennial goal and how to rejuvenate China. And for that, to create a Chinese nation is very, very important for Xi Jinping. And what do you mean by Chinese nation? So in a way, it is making everyone in China, Chinese in their thinking, in their appeal, in like whatnot. So, therefore, there is a lot of the party's emphasis on manufacturing consciousness of the Chinese community, and this is something that has been brought up over and over again throughout Xi Jinping's rule, and it is still going on inside Tibet. So when we talk about Sinification or Sinicization, or some of them prefer like Chinification, I think one very that like at the current discourse and the observers' comments, it centers around Sinification of religion. I think that is not in a way accurate. The observers like to comment about Sinification of religion because the Communist Party situates Sinification in terms of religion. So that's why they are following in that direction. But I think, in my view, it means broader than that. It means changing the identity of everyone inside Tibet, inside China, including, of course, Tibetans and Uyghurs and all the peoples, to become Chinese. I find one very thoughtful piece by Dr. Max Oitman, a professor from Georgetown University, in his writing, which was very, very clear and to the point and very succinct. I think I will just read what he wrote. It's a very succinct paragraph. He's, according to Dr. Max Oitman, he clarifies the misunderstanding over signification of religion, and he says the purpose of that's his preference, Chinification. The purpose of Chinification is not simply the assimilation of minority groups into the Han, but rather the creation of a new supra-ethnic identity animated by loyalty to the PRC state and the messianic world historical mission of the CCP. The Xi Jinping cohort have revived the somewhat moribund phrase Jinhua Minzu to serve as a unifying label for the China-fied people of the PRC. So it is, at the heart of it, Sinification is about converting everyone to be Chinese. So the Communist Party is an identity juggernaut, and it wants everyone to feel and act and believe and represent themselves and identify themselves as Chinese for a Zhonghua Minzu, a Chinese nation. So you can look through these thread, how it has developed over the years and what it means. And I think, the Chinese academics and public intellectuals and policymakers have also played a lot of role, because before Xi Jinping came to power, there were intellectuals like Dr. Ma Rong from Beijing University, and then other intellectuals like Hu Wangang and Hu Lianhe, like from the Tsinghua University, and others from Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, and of course, True Vision, the leader of the United Front Work Department, who in the early 2000s have been advocating for removing all the ethnic policies that were in China, and that would, in a way, acknowledge the distinct identity of all the peoples like Tibetans. And they were, in a way, proactively advocating for complete removal of the autonomy laws and all the nationality policies, and start to impose a policy by which everyone will identify themselves as China. So this is as Chinese. Sorry. So this is what the policymakers and the intellectuals were thinking, and that was where the debate was. And Xi Jinping, I think, has extracted a lot of these into his policy making, and these advocates have, in a way, prevailed in stovepiping their advocacy straight to the leadership at the top level for implementation. And now we have various earlier during the establishment of the PRC, there was this thing called the first generation ethnic policy, and now we can safely assume that is gone, and most of it, and now as these intellectuals, now what we are seeing is implementation of a second generation of ethnic policies. So the second generation of ethnic policies essentially means make everyone Chinese, think Chinese, identify themselves as Chinese, recognize themselves as Chinese. So that's the general common thread that is going across the last 10 years of Xi Jinping's rule, derived from many of the thinkers and philosophers' thinkings and ideologies.
Well, staying on this point of Sinification, can we get a little more detail on specifically how Sinification played out in Tibetan education and in Tibetan religion?
I think, education-wise, this is in terms of Sinification. The schools in Tibet has been a target domain, and the youth demographic a target group, because now, as I said, mentioned earlier, the goal is to create a rejuvenation of China by 2049. So there is still about 27 years left in that to achieve the goal for the Xi Jinping's for Xi Jinping's rule. So how do you convert everyone into Chinese? Like, nobody has invented a machine where you put someone into the machine and out comes the Chinese, right? So you in a way social engineer the people into becoming Chinese. So that is what is happening in Tibet, and that is what right now the focus is for the young generation, like students, Tibetan children. At the early start, they would be taught in primarily in Chinese language, Putonghua, and then politically indoctrinated, and this would start from like 6 years of age. And by the time these children, like 27 years down the line, when they become young men and women, you can literally imagine they would be going through this tube for 27 years, and once they come out of the tube, they would start thinking, identifying themselves as Chinese, because that's what the whole indoctrination has been throughout the tube. And that is a very dangerous, in my opinion. In terms of signification of the Tibetan youth demographic, I think the Tibet Active Institute has done a fantastic report, that talks about the state boarding schools in Tibet. And in their reports, through their research, they found that that 800,000 Tibetan children between the age of 6 and 18, which is this 800,000 roughly is about 78% of the Tibetan children. They all go through this, are all now boarded into these state-run boarding schools. It is also interesting that this policy of establishing boarding schools began way earlier than Xi Jinping's rule. It was launched somewhere in early 2000s, but then in the mainland Chinese heartlands there was a lot of pushback, and somewhere around 2012, at the start of Xi Jinping's rule, many of those the so-called quote-unquote school consolidation policy was withdrawn. The school consolidation policy, in a way, means removing the village schools, the rural schools, and merging them into larger urban education centers. So this was there was a lot of pushback from the Chinese against this policy, and the Communist Party withdrew that policy. But the exact reverse happened inside Tibet, right? For in Tibet, it was even strengthened in terms of implementation, and so by the time in around 2000, like mid 2015s, like few years after Xi Jinping has come into power, now we find about 78% of the Tibetan children in these state boarding schools. And now, the Chinese government's argument is that that they are providing good education, uniforms, textbooks, and whatnot, and that's the argument that I see constantly on the state media. But then, if you look beyond these superficial indicators of uniform or food or things like that, you try to look behind and see what is being taught in these schools. What is the curriculum like? What is the school schedule like? So I think, that is where the real purpose of these schools start to show up. That is like now. For the lack of time, I think I would also address your other question about signification of religion. Religion is also like, as I mentioned earlier, the Communist Party, in terms of its political discourse, is explicitly talking about signification of religion. Earlier in the days when the CCP had, after the Mao's misrule, the Communist Party was relatively moderate in terms of allowing people to believe in their religions. But then, because their political theories and their belief is that, with the process of time, religion will wither away, it will go away. But then the exact opposite happened. Like with the growing materialistic trend in China, religion was mushrooming all over China, and that quite a way startled the Communist Party. They were that was unexpected. According to their theories, it should wither away, but no, it is coming back, and it's like coming back in full force. And it is, in a way, the Communist Party thinks that this is a challenge to their authority, and they want to address it. They have to address it. Otherwise, they will lose all their efforts in getting their legitimacy, political and social legitimacy. So that's why I think Xi Jinping's rule, there's a lot of emphasis of signification of the of religions, and it begins from 2015 at the Central United Work Front Central Conference, that signification was mentioned for the first time. Then, of course, the next year, following year in 2016, the National Religious Work Conference in 2016 again substantiated what signification means and how it should be done. And one of the very interesting fact about this National Religious Work Conference in 2016 is that Xi Jinping presided over that conference. And this was like happening after 15 years, because before him, the other Chinese leaders have not done that. His predecessor was Hu Jintao. He has not presided over such a meeting, but then Xi Jinping thought it's important in terms of his policies, so he presided over this meeting. Then, of course, because he really wants it to be implemented in full force. And the last National Religious Work Conference was in December 2021, and he reiterated the same thinking about Sinicizing all the religions in China. So that would mean, basically at the heart of it, essentially, Sinicization of religions means that the believers should put the Communist Party before their own faith. They should put Xi Jinping before their own prophets. So that is what the signification essentially boils down to, if you look beyond this discourse. That was Xi Jinping during his visit to Lhasa in July 2021. He also went to the Tibetan monastery, Drebung Monastery, and during his interaction with the monks over there, he emphasized about harmonization of religion and, of course, adapting it to the local conditions. And by that, local condition doesn't mean adapting it to the Tibetan conditions, but adapting it to the Chinese conditions. So, so there's there have been a lot of programs or campaigns that were carried out to achieve these goals. Let me just talk a little bit about the four. I won't elaborate much about the 4 Standards campaign that has been happening for the last 4 or 5 years. And now, if we look into the recent campaign, it is now focused on this thing called 3 consciousness in the monastic community. So, if you look into state media, it's always about so and so went into this monastery and conducted the consciousness workshop, and the monks and nuns loved it, all those things. But it's in a way as signifying, trying to significate the religious believers. And I think this will continue. This is very current, and it is going to continue. Maybe the Communist Party may come out with a new campaign sometime down the line with another catchphrase, but essentially it would mean the same thing.
Thank you, Norgay. And in the interest of time, I am going to ask just one more question here before we open it up to questions from our audience. The second major goal of Xi's rule that you identify in your report is the national securitization of Tibet. You write that there had long been a debate among party leaders about whether to emphasize development or security, but under Xi, that debate has ended and security has clearly won out. First of all, when Xi and the other CCP leaders talk about national security in terms of Tibet, what does that mean exactly? What is national security in China's eyes when it comes to Tibet?
Yeah, so national security, when people, they are fantastic, great academics who have written a lot about national security. I think I urge the viewers to read the writings of Dr. Gina Greitens, a professor at the University of Texas, and Dr. Tai Ming Chung, a professor at the University of California, San Diego. Their writings are very clear because they've been studying national security, the discourse in China, and what it means. And I benefited a lot from their research. National security, if we for outside observers, when we think about national security, we think about external threats and how to counter that, what kind of external threat is coming inside the country, that kind of thinking. But then, in terms of China, in Xi Jinping's thinking of ruled party, national security is, as identified by Dr. Gina Greitens, is essentially about regime security of the Communist Party of China. The Communist Party of China has, in a way, very clearly puts forward that political security is the foundation for national security. And what is the political foundation? It's the political security of the Communist Party of China. So, and also, if you look into many of these discourses and many of these Chinese national security meetings, what are they discussing most of the time? It's all about internal Chinese matters, because the Chinese Communist Party thinks that as I mentioned earlier, there was a lot of shake-up in Chinese mentality, the Communist Party's mentality, with the fall of the former implosion of the former Soviet Union and the collapse of communism in Eastern Europe. So they were looking into all those things, and then in their eyes, with changing international scenario, environment, they think that a lot of what quote unquote non-traditional threats are emerging that is going to infiltrate China, and that's going to overturn and lead to fall of Communist Party of China. So that's a threat perception of the Communist Party of China. So in that sense, they have taken a lot of measures against that. And Xi Jinping, early in his rule in 2013, he put forward this concept called overall national security concept, and then a couple of years later, came out with the Chinese national security strategy, and then from there you have all these security-related laws and policies that pop out, all in the name of in the name of national security. And national security in China covers 16 different domains, ranging from military, politics, economy, environment, ecology, deep space, marine. You name it, everything is covered under this thing called national security. So, but everything cannot be about national security, right? So when when national security means everything, in reality, it means nothing but the regime security of China. The regime security of the Communist Party of China. So that's the perception of the Communist Party under Xi Jinping's rule. And then, of course, under that perception, they see Tibetans as a threat to China, and that's what they articulate, and also incorporate in the national security educational guidelines that are taught and implemented all across China's schools and the cities and rural areas, wherever you go. And these education guidelines, if you look into those, they would, in a way, say that Tibetans and the Uyghurs and these quote-unquote minorities in the West, they are all like terrorists, they are extremists, separatists, and that's what is being indoctrinated in the Chinese community in mainland China. So why do they do it? Because in a way, if the Communist Party indoctrinate and them the Chinese with these kind of thinking, then and whatever policies they implement in Tibet, in the Chinese people's view, it's fighting separatism, fighting terrorism, fighting extremism. So the perspectives changed through a state indoctrination in the name of national security, which in fact means regime security of the CCP.
Thanks very much, Norgay. This has been a very informative discussion about Xi's rule in Tibet. And I hope for our audience, this has given you all a lot of information about the situation there right now and what it means to have Xi Jinping in power in China. And I want to turn now to questions from our audience. So firstly, we have two questions here from Soltrum Kunsong. And the first question is, Norgay, thank you for your research on Xi's life. It sounds like an interesting read. Can you share the title of the book so I can put that in my reading list? So I'll go ahead and answer that one, and then we can move on to the second question. It's the title of Norgay's report is 10 Years of Xi Jinping, Sinification and Securitization of Tibetans for the Chinese Nation State. As I mentioned earlier, that report will be published by ICT very soon, so please check our website for that. But let me move on to the second question from Soltrum Kunsang La, and that is, what made Xi go the opposite of what we hoped for when he first assumed the presidency? Isn't it a good learning curve for us not to rely or hope too much on individuals down the line in our struggle? And Norgay, I will turn that to you.
That's a great, fantastic question. Obviously, as I mentioned during my talk, that there was a lot of optimism, hope that things will change for the better with Xi Jinping at the top leadership. And you're absolutely right that it's. I think I agree with you. It's wrong, or I should say, it's an error to place all the hopes on individuals, politicians, rulers. In my thinking, I would look more, broader in terms of the Communist Party of China's thinking. That's the best indicator of how things may change or shape up in the future. So individual rulers come and go, but then the Communist Party of China is there to stay, and that is like the institution through which all these policies are being implemented and maintained, and historical memory is there, and time and again it would cycle and come back to square one. So, Xi Jinping, despite all his family connections and all the hopes, when he became the president of China, he was entrusted with a mandate by the Communist Party senior, the elders, and that mandate was to ensure the longevity and survival of the Communist Party of China. And I think that is exactly what he's doing. All his policies, thinking points to that direction, that he is a party man at the heart of it. He's vanguard of the Communist Party of China. And, let's say there are many people who are also comparing Xi Jinping to Mao Zedong. Mao and Xi, I think, are two different types of leaders, in my opinion. Of course, Xi Jinping is the most powerful leader after Mao ruled China. But then Mao was, when he was facing a lot of criticism upon himself, he would in a way direct the people to destroy the Communist Party of China. That was how he was channelizing the energy. He can do lots of very extreme, dangerous things, but Xi Jinping doesn't do that. He is all about Communist Party of China, and so that's what my thinking is, that it's an error to place too much of a hope in terms of individuals, politicians, family background and all, but the better indicator of where policies are and how it may go forward would be look at the broader policy thinking of the Communist Party of China.
Thanks, Norgay. We have one last question here before we wrap up, and this is from Andrea Sims, who writes, "What is the effect of children attending Chinese boarding schools? Are the children able to continue to value Tibetan traditions, or is the indoctrination generally successful?"
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of children in these state-run boarding schools that are being indoctrinated, that are being sent through this tube, at the end of which, once they emerge as a young man or woman into the workforce with their own thinking and positions, they would there's a lot of danger that they would emerge out as thinking of themselves as Chinese, because that is what Xi Jinping wants them to think. That is what Xi Jinping said during the 7th Tibet Work Forum in 2020. Tibet Work Forum is like the highest policy-making body in terms of Tibet policy. And during that work forum, he said, that the Communist Party of China should strongly implement ideological and political education, indoctrination of the children at all levels to inculcate loyalty and love to China and the Chinese nation and blah, blah, blah. So that is what the thinking is, that is what the instructions are. But then at the ground level, I think I do have some hope that it is not very straightforward like that. There are going to be lots of pushback in terms of Tibetan cultural resilience. The state and the Communist Party might wish for all the children, the Tibetans, to think in terms of their ideologies, in terms of what they instruct. But then also there's Tibet, and the Tibetans have a long history. It's a civilization. It has a history of around 3,000 years old, and some may even say 4,000, but that's let's leave it for now. With this civilization and cultural thinking at the back, it's not going to be very easy for the Communist Party of China to change Tibetan mindset. There's going to be a lot of pushback, and the party would again come down even harder. That's how the cycle has been going on, and unfortunately, this is how things are. So it's a push and pull all the time, and I have faith in the Tibetan cultural resilience that we will prevail in the long run.
Thank you, Norgay. It is important to end on a positive note. And, as you said, Tibetans are a very culturally resilient people. The future is not set in stone. I know we've shared a lot of distressing news about what the situation under Xi Jinping is, but through our actions, we can help create a better future. And I want to encourage everyone who is watching or listening to this now to please help us to pass the Promoting a Resolution to the Tibet-China Conflict Act here in the United States. This is a very important piece of legislation that will increase pressure on the Chinese government to resume dialogue with His Holiness the Dalai Lama and his envoys to reach a peaceful resolution to China's illegal occupation of Tibet by recognizing that Tibet's legal status has yet to be determined under international law. This is a very important piece of legislation that can help change the future of Tibet. So please sign our petition to your members of Congress at www.savetibet.org/resolvetibet. And while you are there, don't forget to sign our petition about the Panchen Lama at www.savetibet.org/Panchen_Lama. Finally, as I mentioned several times, Norgay La's report on Xi Jinping's 10 years will be published soon by ICT. Please check our website and sign up to make sure you don't miss any of our updates at www.savetibet.org/join. So thank you to all of you for sharing your questions, for watching and listening to this program. Thank you, Norgay La, for this very informative, eye-opening, and urgent conversation. We will be back next month with another episode of Tibet Talks. Until then, as our first guest on this program, Professor Tenzin Dorji likes to say, stay safe, stay well, and stay active. Jujje.